Danny Sprinkle has 13 newcomers on this Washington roster, hoping to get the Huskies back in the big dance for the first time since 2019.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, folks? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and you are joining us at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. I want to thank all of you who've made this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Give a special shout out to those everyday listeners and those of you hanging out with us in the Locked On College Basketball Discord community. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com and you'll get 50% off your first year. Well, folks, we are doing our 12th team preview of the offseason here, talking about the Washington Huskies with Locked On Huskies host Roman Tomashoff today. Today, this is, I think, our third in the Big Ten, so I'm very excited to get into this conference. We're going to be talking about the history of this Washington team last year, how they did in the first season under Coach Danny Sprinkle. We'll talk about the updated roster, 13 newcomers for Danny Sprinkle's team. We'll also make some predictions. This team finished towards the bottom of the Big Ten, but there's some real reason for optimism about how they're going to do this season. But Roman, let's start by taking a look at last year. This team 13-18 overall. They came out of non-conference with a 9-2 record, but then really struggled with that big travel schedule in the Big Ten. Just 4-16 in conference play. They had a 2-8 start in the conference with a win over Maryland at home, a win at Minnesota, and then they also beat Northwestern at home and beat Penn State on the road, but that was it. They got swept by the other kind of former Pac-12 schools, UCLA, USC, Oregon, combined 0-6 against those three teams, did not appear in the postseason. Roman, obviously, we did not expect a complete easy one-year turnaround for Danny Sprinkle at Washington, although he did do that the previous time he started at Utah State, came over from Montana State, immediately had success at Utah State. But what were your thoughts kind of on the highs and lows of last season for this UW team?
So first of all, I have to be honest, I was completely wrong because of what Danny had done at previous stops. I certainly expected a little bit of a stronger start.
Yeah.
And it was something where toward the end of the year, one of the things I just truly appreciate about Danny as a coach is he's very honest with us in the media. And it was after the loss to Indiana in early March at some point, where he was just kind of like, yeah, we have a lot of players who are playing for the name on the back and not for the name on the front. And basketball has not necessarily been priority number one. And he also just said, when I got here in the transfer portal, there were not a lot of true Big Ten option kind of players left available, which certainly put so much on the shoulders of Great Asabor last season. And he still performed. I mean, he didn't live up to expectations where, you know, I know Andy Katz sent him the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year, preseason All-American, all that sort of stuff. And you still look at the numbers at the end of the year, and it's shocking to say that he was underwhelming, where he led the team in points, rebounds, assists, and steals. Like, he was really, really solid last season. And I look at what last season turned into, and it was unfortunate. Even some of those wins, they were in Big Ten play, they were all just heart throbbing wins of, oh man, are they really going to be able to pull this off? Like, I remember being at the Northwestern one. It's, this game might slip away at a few different points. But I look at where this team was from last year, and I just couldn't be more excited about what this team is going to do. Obviously, they invested so heavily in the transfer portal and did such a good job going out there and recruiting. And I think that motion that he's building, despite what it looked like on the floor in year one, is really going to help turn Washington back into the powerhouse that it used to be of the, you know, for me personally, the Brandon Roy, the Isaiah Thomas years, where they were one of the more dominant teams in the RIP Pac-10 to Pac-12 era. And with all of the talent that Danny has brought in, I think that this program is absolutely headed in the right direction.
Yeah, and I think there's almost this sort of unfair expectation now because of some really high-profile coaching changes. You know, Mark Pope goes to Kentucky and immediately that team's great. They were good before, but then, you know, you have something like Louisville where Pat Kelsey takes over. They were very bad under Kenny Payne, and then they immediately turned things around. And it almost feels like now there's this expectation that coaches coming up should immediately be able to turn these programs around. And it's not always going to be the case. And I think for Washington, it was a unique circumstance of, you have a new coach and you have a coach who's had a ton of success at the Mountain West level is a very quality conference, and prior to that in the Big Sky. But then not only does he take over, the school also goes through this major transition into the Big Ten, where they're playing conference games against Rutgers and against Maryland. They're playing, as Mick Cronin famously said, we've seen the Statue of Liberty twice in the last 3 weeks, and like, I think that we saw a lot of those kind of former Pac-12 schools struggle a little bit. UCLA didn't live up to expectations. USC was not very good. Oregon had their moments. They were the best out of those four, but didn't exactly like light the world on fire necessarily. Right. And I think like for Sprinkle, like there should still be plenty of optimism. And you also now, I mean, I think the big storyline for this team is the guys that were there last year, pretty much all of them are gone. You have two returners, and we'll talk about them in a second, two pretty, important pieces for this team, but everybody else is out the door. You mentioned Great Osobor, but you also lose a Tyler Harris, you lose a Makai Mason. They hit the transfer portal. You have quite a few guys graduating. And so now you're getting an opportunity for Sprinkle to have a full off season to be able to go get players that he thinks more fit his system, as well as you mentioned, Big Ten caliber players. And we'll get more into the specifics of this roster, but I think the main question for you, Roman, is, do you still feel this level of optimism around Danny Sprinkle? How much has that dimmed after 1 year? Or is it like, hey, let's give him a couple of years to kind of get his bearings here and see what he's able to do?
That's exactly where I am, because that was another thing that he mentioned where toward the end of the year, it was, this was never going to be a 1 year rebuild. It was always going to take several seasons. And I think that, me personally, I think that I'm certainly at fault for this, where the expectations were very high, where he did the exact same thing at Utah State, where he goes over there for Montana State and literally didn't have a single player that had played a minute in the previous season, and took that team to, 27-8 and gets them to the tournament. Like that was, he did such an amazing job with that just transition and that just complete overhaul of that roster. And I feel like it was just kind of like, this is what this guy does. He comes in and takes over right away. And I still think that there's a lot to like from last season. When you look at the way he talks and you look at guys who, a story that I think is really telling of just what kind of coach Danny Sprinkle is Luis Courtwright was a player who wound up getting suspended from the team at a certain point in time last season. And even after that, and Danny admitted that he was in his doghouse at certain points last year, we still got to talk to Luis, who said, if you want to, be made into a man and, really learn what it's like to learn the game of basketball and play at a high level, you need to come play for Coach Sprinkle. And it was just, I think that that's really telling of what kind of person he is, both on and off the floor. And again, as I just kind of look at everything that he's been able to go and bring in, you mentioned Tyler Harris and Makai Mason, who I think, no disrespect to anybody else, were the two biggest losses in terms of just an optic standpoint. I think that every single player that Danny Sprinkle brought in is an upgrade over where they were last season. And I think a lot of that just needs to be credited to the fact that they went really hard on the recruiting trail. And they certainly poured in a significant amount of NIL into this roster. But at the same point, that's kind of what you need to do to get better in this day and age. And Danny is certainly someone who understands that. I know it doesn't matter for the conversation right now, but look who they had on campus less than a month ago. They had Dylan Mingo on campus for an official visit. And I mean, I feel like if you look around the country, that's something where if somebody were to, college basketball fan were to guess where he's taking his official visits, Washington would certainly not be on that list. So I think that there are certainly some very telling signs of what kind of not only coach Danny is, but what kind of recruiter he is as well. And when you look at this roster, you are certainly starting to see that. And as we, just kind of get into the season, I think it's going to be very clear that Washington has an opportunity to be the most improved team in the country, in my opinion.
Well, let's talk about that, Roman, because I think that this is a team that, as you mentioned, phenomenal transfer portal class. They got 8 guys coming in. They got 5 freshmen coming in as well. And only 2 returners, but there is some familiar faces, and we're going to talk about that, what this roster looks like, some starting lineup projections as well, all that coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, Mazda crafts cars for those who do more than simply move. Mazda delivers confidence with every ride, with more IIHS Top Safety Pick awards than anybody else as of August 2025. From footwork to breathwork, athletes sweat out all the details. Mazda brings this same intention to how they craft every model. You can feel that incredible Japanese craftsmanship in every detail, from the metallic accents to the available Nappa leather upholstery. With all-wheel drive standard in every crossover SUV, you can drive with confidence throughout almost any season, because with Mazda, everyday drivers feel like anything but, from smooth handling to intuitive controls. Like our players, Mazda sweats every detail. because when you make every move count, impossible becomes irrelevant. Mazda, move and be moved. Well, folks, we're coming up on the weekend, and it's time to look back and crown this week's MVP on Who Delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash Streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. And for the Huskies, since we're talking UW, Jonah Coleman, running back, delivered in a big way last week. Coleman had 5 rushing touchdowns on just 15 carries against UC Davis. When the pressure was on, Coleman came through, no hesitation, no delay. And just like Coleman delivered for the Huskies, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you can save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Promo period through November 18th. All right, Roman, continuing our conversation here, looking at this Washington rebuilt Huskies roster here, heading into the second season for Coach Danny Sprinkle. And I'm really excited to get into this additions, some really fun players coming over in the transfer portal, some fun freshmen as well. But let's start quickly with the 2 players who did choose to return for the Huskies this year. That's point guard Zoom Diallo entering his sophomore year, and then center Frank Kepnong, who's been around for a really long time, but has had massive injury issues. I was just looking at his page because, Roman, I could not believe that he was still playing college basketball. Feels like he's been around forever. I think this is like his 6th season. But
You're 6.
Yeah, he's played like 10 or less games, like 3 of the last couple of years. Productive player when he's on the floor. Obviously, getting these 2 guys back, what does it mean to have at least a little bit of continuity going into this next year?
Oh, it means so much. And I want to start with Frank because I think I've watched UW basketball for my entire life. And I think when he is on the floor, he is one of my top 5 favorite players I've ever watched come through Washington because of the energy he brings on both ends of the floor. He's just so much fun. And it's always just been that. It's just staying healthy. And Danny Sprinkle, when he talked to us over the summer, said that this is the healthiest he's ever seen him. There have been no setbacks, anything like that. He's lost 10, 15 pounds somewhere in that ballpark to be able to keep some extra pressure off his knees. So that's a really nice sign. And obviously, it's all a what if until we see him play an entire season. But whenever he is out there, he is certainly a very important guy. And then Zoom Diallo. I think that Zoom Diallo had a really nice freshman season. There were some mistakes in terms of the turnover number was certainly higher than you'd like it to be. But as I look at Zoom, one of the things that he got to talking with us about over the summer in the media was he spent his entire summer working as an off-ball guard. And I think that's just a really interesting thing to note here because obviously Desmond Claude, who we'll get into in a little bit, has a lot of experience as an on-ball guard during his time at USC. I don't think he's going to be asked to do very much of that in Danny's system because I look at a guy like Kimari Peterson, who's coming in from East Tennessee State, and JJ Mandequid as well, the true freshman, who I think those are the guys who are going to be asked to be the primary on-ball guards. So with Zoom, while he certainly has that experience and this coaching staff is very excited about what he can bring in that department. As we look at what, this roster is right now, if you can just expand his skill set and he can be a little bit better of a shooter from long range, combining that with what he already is as a slasher, I think that he's got the opportunity to take a big step forward this season.
It's funny you mentioned Zoom potentially playing more off the ball because of turnover issues. And I'm glad you also mentioned that seems to be the plan with Desmond Claude because I'm pretty sure he led the country in turnovers. We're very close. And Desmond Claude's a great player, and he can put so much pressure on opposing teams because of his size when he has the ball in his hands, but he was also a little bit of a liability with the ball in his hands so much. And so I think that transitioning him to a bit more of an off-ball role, transitioning Zoom to an off-ball role can potentially limit the turnovers for this team and let those guys, for Claude, I think part of the challenge is him playing off the ball when he's not a very good three-point shooter does kind of limit you offensively in some ways, but he's incredibly good at getting to the rim. He is just such a big player positionally for his size. Even if he's playing off the ball, he's still going to have that. And one of the kind of most intriguing things about this roster in my mind is that Claude is teaming up with his former USC teammate in Wesley Yates. And Wesley Yates, of course, is back at Washington. For those who do not know, Wesley Yates originally committed to Washington out of high school and spent his freshman year there, but was dealing with a foot injury and did not play at all. That was the final year of Coach Mike Hopkins and that staff gets canned. Wesley Yates transfers, goes to USC. And then by the time he Eric Musselman finally figures out to start playing him, he dominates in the second half of that year, like 18 points a game, shot like 48% from three, was completely nuclear. He hits the transfer portal. Every school on planet Earth is trying to get him, and he ends up going back to Washington. And from my understanding, there's a bit of a coaching connection there to help get Wesley and potentially Desmond back together, teaming up again at UW. And that just feels like such a dynamic backcourt duo to have playing together again.
Oh, it absolutely is. And to start with the coaching connection there, yeah, his cousin Quincy Pondexter, former first-round pick, UW legend, loved watching Quincy Pondexter as well. He was on that Mike Hopkins staff, recruited him to come join him, and then Eric Musselman hired him and Will Conroy, who were both canned from the Hopkins staff down at USC. Pondexter was not retained after 1 year, and it always kind of felt like it was down to UW or Kentucky. And one thing that Wesley told us over the summer was that it felt like there was some unfinished business, and he wanted to carry on the family legacy at Washington, which is one of the reasons that he decided to come back, which is really great to hear, because he said that the energy is so much different now that he's back, and him teaming up with Desmond Claude is really great. And Andy, one thing that I'm really glad you pointed out is that, yeah, when you look at Desmond Claude as 3-point shooter, it's not necessarily the numbers that you might want, but I'm also very glad you brought up Wesley Yates, who, was just shooting the lights out all season long. And it was like 43% for the season. Washington has 3 guys who are in my projected starting lineup, at least, that shot over 40% from deep last year. It's not just Wesley Yates. It's not just Kimari Peterson, who is top 20 in the nation in percentage of 3-point field goals made. It's also Jacob Ognisevich from Lipscomb, who was the player of the year in ASUN last year, who 20 points, 8 rebounds per game, shot 40% as well. So having Desmond Claude on the wing, who can still be a slasher, and obviously I think they're going to continue working with him and try to develop more of an outside shot, just having that kind of threat on the wing where he can space the floor and also just get to the rim at will and play more 4 out, 1 in is going to be something that I think we're going to see a fair amount of from the Stanley Sprinkle system. And with somebody like Wesley Yates, just looking at what this backcourt can be last season, like I looked at it, and Tyree Inacho was somebody who I liked what he brought from a speed and defense kind of standpoint, but he was never going to be that outside shooter. DJ Davis was really hot and cold at different points in time. Tyler Harris shot the lights out. I think it's 50% from the season from 3-point range. Makai Mason had his on and off nights as well. There was never really that much consistency. And I look at what this team can be this year. It's not just Kimari Peterson, Desmond Claude, Wesley Yates. It's some of these guys coming off the bench too. Zoom Diallo can just, again, find more of that outside shot. Plus a guy like Cortland Muldrew, one of the true freshmen. JJ Mandequit is somebody that every single player who we've talked to, whether they be a freshman or a 5th, 6th year senior, have said something just really complimentary of JJ Mandequit, being like, that guy is a leader on and off the floor. And I think I'm pretty sure it was either Wesley or Desmond Claude who said that is the best true point guard I've ever been around in my life.
Let's talk more about this freshman class, Roman, because that I think it's easy to focus on the transfers, and obviously the Claude and Yates connection I think is a fascinating part of this team. But this is a really good freshman class for UW, and I think not only the internet or the domestic guys, obviously Mandequit, you talked about him. He was the teammate for AJ Dybansa. He also played for the Team USA and the FIBA U19 this year, and really kind of made a name for himself. He's I think a player that, a lot of people kind of thought, I don't know how much he's going to play in year 1, but you're seeming to indicate, based on the idea of shifting Claude and Zoom off the ball, that Mandequit would take on more of an on-ball role, potentially behind Peterson, which I think is great for his development. But I think the other big name here, and I know you want to talk about Cortland Muldrew, and I definitely want to hear more about him, but I think we also have to talk about Hannes Steinbach, who comes over from Germany, also dominated in that same FIBA U19 event. I mean, there's a lot of buzz about him as potentially being a one and done type of freshman for this team. And having seen him play in that event and kind of the skill set and the positional size that he has, he seems very dangerous. What are your thoughts on him and kind of the rest of this freshman class?
Oh, I got to start with Hannes, because I don't think there's any player that I've just seen more, like, just when he signed, it was, oh, okay, this guy's pretty good. And then even before FIBA, when you look at the Bundesliga playoffs, he averaged double-double throughout that playoffs. And then he goes to the FIBA U19, gets named to the all-tournament team, averages 17 and 13 in that tournament, was just absolutely tremendous. Danny Sprinkle compared him to Dennis Rodman as a rebounder. And it's really cool just like listening to some of the stories where his father played with Dirk Nowitzki for a little while. So they have a nice family connection with him and everything. And it's really cool to hear about all that. And by the end of his recruitment, Danny was very honest and said every single team in the country was trying to get in on this kid, but we identified him early enough. He gave a lot of credit to assistant coach Andy Hill for being the one to identify him and get in on him extra early. And every single blue blood was trying to get in the mix to sign Hannes Steinbach, but Washington got him really, really early. And it's just a really nice testament to what this coaching staff can do in terms of their scouting. And he's someone who I don't know if he starts this year, to be honest, because of some of the experience that you have in Jacob Ognisevich, in Frank Kepnong or Lathan Somerville, whoever it might be. But having a guy like that, no matter if he is in the starting lineup or coming off the bench, is just such a real weapon. But yeah, I do need to spend a couple of seconds here on Cortland Mulger as well. He's someone who I asked Danny Sprinkle about him the last time we got to speak to him. And one of the things that he said was he's like a wild horse. He is so much fun to watch. And he's someone who just takes on challenges every single day in practice. He wants to guard Desmond Claude. He wants to guard Wesley Yates. He wants to get up in their face and, talk and just do everything he can to get better every single day. And he's someone else who there were some other big schools that were certainly pushing to try to get him to flip from Washington late, and nothing like that even came close to coming to fruition because he was so locked in with what Danny Sprinkle and DeMarlo Slocum was the guy who identified him, were able to sell him on early in the process. And a fun little side note where I'm very curious to see what his role might be this season. But I remember when we were doing one of our media interviews with some of the basketball guys, he walked by us and Zoom Diallo had him under his arm and started pointing at him and said, "This guy right here, this guy's a future All-American." So it's just really fun to just see those little things like that. And I do just truly believe it when you watch his film and you look at where his body is right now and how it already looks like he can absorb the physicality of playing in the Big Ten. I'm just so excited to see what that might look like for him as a true freshman.
Let's talk a little bit about this projected starting lineup, because we've kind of hinted at it a few times, and I think there's a handful of different ways that this could potentially go. I mean, you mentioned Steinbeck probably coming off the bench, Zoom potentially coming off the bench, but there's 7 or 8 guys that feel like they could compete for starting spots on this team. I'll tell you, John Rothstein, his projections have the 3 of the guards. They have Peterson, Claude, and Yates all starting together. To me, Claude and Yates are locks to start. That feels pretty obvious, and then you can kind of fill around a bunch of different ways. I do think Ognachevich, is going to start from Lipscomb, like you mentioned, 20 points per game last year. He's kind of the most pure power forward on this roster, in my mind at least, because Steinbeck, I think, could play the 4, but he could also maybe play the 3 a little bit. And then the 5 position feels like it kind of depends on the health for Frank Kepnog in my mind, but it could also be Lathan Somerville, the transfer from Rutgers. But for Rothstein, he has Ognachevich and Somerville as the starting 5, rounding it out with Peterson, Claude, and Yates. What are your thoughts? Is that kind of how you think this is going to shake out for the starting lineup?
So I think Frank Kepnong is going to be a shoe-in to be in the starting lineup at the beginning of the year. I feel like some of Rothstein's thinking on that might be that Frank came off the bench at the end of last season, and I think that was partially just to limit his workload and try to keep him healthy down the stretch. I think that it's going to, as long as he's healthy, it's going to be a full tilt kind of thing for him this year, but adding not just Lathan Somerville, but one of the top 3 junior college players in the nation in Madi Traore is going to be really important there as well, because Danny has told us that he's not afraid to play 3 big guys, where he's talked about Lathan Somerville's ability to shoot. He was an 86% free throw shooter last season. He says, yeah, don't sleep on that guy, maybe taking a few more threes this season. So I'm very curious to see what that might look like. One thing, Andy, I do think that Hannes is going to wind up being a true 4. We haven't fully seen him develop that outside shot just yet. And he's someone with the way he rebounds the basketball. I think he's just going to thrive down low, and just some of the twitch and the ability he's shown to just find ways to get himself free down low is so much fun to watch. So whatever it ends up being with him as a starter off the bench, he's going to be such a weapon. And I do think that Rothstein is correct with the starting 3 guards, where Kimari Peterson is just electric. And one of the things that Danny Sprinkle talked about a lot last season, and then has called Kimari just one of the better options for that on the team, is they didn't have an end of clock guy who can just throw up those contested threes. And he gave us a stat at some point over the summer saying that he was like 62% in late clock situations from the top of the key or something like that. It's crazy, just the clutch factor that he has, which is something that, again, Washington didn't have last season. So I think that's going to be the starting 5 right there with Wesley Yates and Desmond Claude. And then I look at the bench And I'm so curious to see how this shakes out, because one true freshman who I didn't mention, but I think this coaching staff is really excited about, is Jasier Rencher, a former 4-star recruit who flipped from Texas A&M to Washington after Buzz Williams left, is someone who this coaching staff seems to really like. One thing Danny Sprinkle told me was that he's kind of had to push Jasier to come out of his shell a little bit, but they really like his frame and his size and his ability to shoot the basketball. So if he's the backup 3, I'm not going to be shocked. But then again, you also have JJ Mandaquit and Zoom Diallo and Cortland Muldrew who are coming off that bench. And on top of that, Christian Nitu is a guy who I think might redshirt this season, the Florida State transfer. He's got all the size and potential in the world. He looked really solid at the U20 FIBA tournament over in Greece, I believe it was, for Team Romania, by the way. I just think that he's somebody, if you redshirt him for a year and put 15, 20 pounds on his frame, there is so much work that can be done there. And then coming into 2026, if he takes over as a starter, assuming Hannes Steinbach is a one and done, and Jacob Ognisevich being out of eligibility and Frank Kepnang being out of eligibility, there's certainly a lot to like there. And this rotation is surprisingly deep.
Well, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take a look at the schedule for Washington, their non-conference schedule, the matchups for them in the Big Ten. Then we're going to make some predictions. How do we think this team's going to do in their second year in the Big Ten? Will they get back to the NCAA tournament? All that and more coming up here in just a second. But first, folks, the NFL season is here, and FanDuel is making sure that you're ready for kickoff with a can't-miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. One of the great things about FanDuel is that it fits however you like to bet. Player props, building a same-game parlay, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add a little bit more energy to your Sundays. The Seahawks are 2.5-point underdogs on the road against the Steelers on Sunday. For those of you out in Seattle wanting to maybe make some money, and if you're ready to play, download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. Well, most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's your 401ks, your properties, or your investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or on your phone. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. My wife and I spend a lot of time making sure that our finances are up to date and in good shape, and Monarch makes it so easy for us to review our finances together. We can both see budgets, we can see goals, and our spending activity in one place. So don't let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONCollege. All right, Roman, closing out our show, continuing our conversation here, talking about the Washington Huskies. We talked about Danny Sprinkle's first season at the helm for UW, how they did. We talked about this very new look roster, replacing 13 of the 15 players, including some starting lineup projections. Now we're going to take a look at this team's schedule, their matchups in the Big Ten, and make some predictions for how we think they'll do. Roman, I'm going to rattle off their non-con schedule here, and we've seen this with the Big Ten in particular, especially these kind of West Coast Big Ten teams. They're not necessarily putting together the most competitive non-conference schedules because they're going to have a gauntlet in conference play. And for those who are listeners of the show the last couple of weeks, I have spent a lot of time digging into UCLA's non-conference schedule, which was particularly egregious. They only leave the state of California once. And Washington's is definitely a little bit better than that because they have this road game at Baylor. They're going out to Waco to take on the Bears on November 9th. That is one of two matchups against power conference teams. They also take on Utah, a former big Pac-12 matchup, taking on the Utes on December 29th. Every other matchup is against non-power teams, although they are playing at Washington State, who is effectively a power conference team and certainly not an easy matchup when you're playing them, a rival on the road. And then you got the Acrisure event where you're taking on Nevada November 27th, and then either Colorado or San Francisco, depending on how that first game goes. Colorado, obviously a power conference team, and San Francisco, a very, very good mid-major team, as is Nevada. So this is certainly a decently competitive schedule. And you got UNLV in that exhibition game as well, which should be a fun one. So, Roman, do you have any thoughts on this non-conference schedule, kind of knowing what it's like to go through that Big Ten gauntlet as well?
I absolutely do. But first, I have to make an amendment. I'm ashamed of myself. When we were talking about the rotation a second ago, I didn't mention a former 5-star recruit who's probably going to be the backup 3 in Indiana transfer Bryson Tucker. And that's just another name that needs to be thrown out there as someone who can be a lethal scorer off the bench for this roster. Just want to make sure I throw that out there so nobody yells at me. But yeah, I'm really intrigued by the scheduling. When I saw the Baylor matchup come to fruition, I was really excited because I just think that's going to be a really fun test for this team early in the season, where last year it was a little interesting. I remember going to the home opener against UC Davis and just kind of being like, oh, this isn't necessarily what I expected this to look like.
Right.
And so I think that with the improved talent on this roster, seeing them go to such a hostile environment early on. You mentioned the Washington State game as well. Washington won the Acrisure Invitational last year, by the way. So I think that's something that needs to be mentioned, that it's cool. They're going to go down there and go through that process again, where they took on and beat a tough Colorado State team there last year. So I think that this, especially when you compare it to the UCLAs of the world, it is a really fun non-conference schedule. But, as we kind of get into predictions and expectations here, I think that Washington has a legitimate chance to be a top 25 team this season. And with the talent on the roster, I think that most people might not say that's a hot take, but coming off of where they were last year, there are going to be some pretty high expectations around the season. And if you can come out of Baylor with a win, which I know is a big if right now, but if you can really prove yourself in some of these early non-conference games, I think by the time Big Ten play rolls around, this team will not only be battle tested, but there's going to be some big time hype around some of these guys as well.
The Baylor game is so fun to me because it's November 9th, so it's very early in the season, and Washington will be playing with 13 new players and will be playing one of the very few power conference teams with fewer returners than Washington, because Baylor does not have anybody returning to their roster. They are 0.0% returning minutes for the Bears. The fact that these two teams are playing each other with combined 2 returning players and neither of them went through a coaching change is a really strong kind of indictment on the state of college basketball at this point. I mean, that is exceedingly rare to see that happen in this sport, but it is also going to make for a really fun matchup. I like a lot of the pieces on Baylor's roster. I like a lot of the pieces on this Washington roster. And I think both these teams are going to be a lot better in January and February and March than they are in November, which might make this a really fun game. But I agree with you, Roman. I think that there is a very real possibility where UW picks up a win at Baylor because of all of that, because Baylor's roster is so new and because they haven't quite put all the pieces together. While that's true for Washington, I do think that there's a chance that they could go get a W there. Even if they don't, you can come out of the schedule 10-1. I don't want to say easily. It's never easy, but Washington State doesn't look like they're going to be great. It's a tough road game, but it's a winnable game for sure. Won Acrisure last year, could definitely win it again this year. If you knock off Utah by the end of the year, I think Washington's talent-wise is a better team than Utah, and they're at home, so they should be able to get that one. I mean, you could be 10-1 out of this non-conference and in a position where 10-1 or even 11-0. I mean, it's not out of the question whatsoever. But then you get into conference play, and like we said, Roman, last year 9-2 in the non-con, and then 4-16 in the Big Ten. I feel pretty confident in saying they're going to be better than 4-16 this year. The schedule lines up decently well for them. You got 3 teams you play twice. It's those same teams: Oregon, UCLA, USC. And then some of the tougher matchups: Michigan, Michigan State, Ohio State, Wisconsin. You get all those teams just at home. You don't have to play them on the road. Yes, you got to play Purdue on the road. You got to play Illinois on the road. You got to play Maryland on the road. But Rutgers, Nebraska, Northwestern, they're not great teams. Granted, Rutgers is a long road trip, but I think there's a schedule here that could benefit Washington and put them in a position to be much, much better than 4-16. I'll tell you here, I have my predictions for this team, and I want to hear your kind of reaction to this, Roman. I have them going 10-1 in the non-conference, and I have them going 11-9 in conference play. That would put them with a 21-10 record. That should absolutely get them into the NCAA tournament, barring like a really bad Big Ten overall, which would be surprising. So that's kind of where I'm at with this team right now. What are your thoughts on how you think they're going to finish this year?
I love this. To be honest, I haven't gone through and done a full record prediction just yet because I look at it and I think, no matter what it looks like, this team needs to be much improved from last season. Yeah. I love where you're going with this, because one thing that I wanted to make sure we touched on here is with the way this roster just got the overturn and got such an influx of NIL to go out and get all this top talent. I feel like making the NCAA tournament this year is the absolute worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
You need to get into the NCAA tournament and you need to win games, because it just feels like this is such a great opportunity for Washington basketball where, Andy, you said it right off the top, this team hasn't made the tournament since 2019. And it's somewhat frustrating because, you look at the first year after that with Isaiah Stewart, Jaden McDaniels, the Quad A Green scenario, which is a road that I don't think we need to go down. But I look at everything that has happened with this team for so long. It's been, there's talent, there's this, there's that. The roster, no matter what some of the high-end talent on that roster looked like, Jaden McDaniels obviously getting that huge contract with the Timberwolves, Isaiah Stewart, who, he starts fights every week, but I just love watching him. He was so good while he was here too. Everything that, like, all the high-end talent on that roster had, none of those rosters had depth like this. And combined with Danny Sprinkle, who has proven to be a really great coach who can take teams really far, even on lesser talent, I think that should be the bare minimum expectation. And this team has everything it needs to make a Sweet 16 run. And it feels like that's what the vibe is, at least internally. And as I look at the way the schedule sets up, yeah, you're right. There are some really long road trips on the schedule. But even when you go back to last season, outside of the abomination that was the Michigan trip, where, they go and they scored like 15 points in the first half at Michigan State or whatever it was. I know I'm over exaggerating there, but not by too much. Not by too much. If you look at just take that trip out of the equation. And take out, I know there's the early season game against USC as well. There were so many games where that team was in it until the last 5-7 minutes, which is a huge testament to the job that Danny Sprinkle has done as a coach. And as I look at what he can be moving forward, if he can get all these guys to buy in, which I fully believe he can and will, this team has all the talent in the world to be one of the top 5 or 6 teams in this conference.
That's a perfect place to end, Roman. Thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I appreciate your expertise on this Washington team. That's going to wrap it up for us today. We got one more team preview coming your way later this week, and then Isaac and I will be back with our second conference preview for Friday's show. As always, though, we do want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the McBruins. And until next time, folks, peace out.